Welcome to today's episode of Apostolic Life in the 21st Century. We thank you for taking your time out to tune into this broadcast. We believe this is going to be beneficial to you. Today we're talking about this topic of small group ministry. We're going to get Dr. David K. Bernard's input on this this ministry that's growing in importance. We're going to hear what he has to say about that today. So thank you for listening. Dr. Bernard, one of the big changes that has happened during my lifetime has been the rise of small groups. Now, I know small groups have been around for a long time. They probably predate my arrival on the scene. But it seems like they really have grown in popularity, and many apostolic churches have picked this up as a model of ministry. Let me start by asking you what I think is probably the most important question, and that is small group ministry biblical?
The short answer is yes. And by the way, the Pentecostal Resources Group, Pentecostal Publishing House, has just come out with two good books on small groups, one by the editor-in-chief, Robin Johnston, and the other by the associate editor-in-chief, Leanne Alexander. So I would certainly recommend both of those resources for the theology, the concept, the practical application, various models, and also interviews with various ministers whose churches are doing this. So going back to your main question, is it biblical? Well, absolutely yes. So if we go back historically, in the beginning, in the New Testament church, and for 2 or 3 centuries, there were no physical church buildings. So what we think of as going to church, a public building or building owned by that church, is actually several centuries removed from the origin. That's not to say it's wrong, because I think buildings are tools that can be very effective tools, especially in our culture and society. So I think they serve a very valuable purpose. But if you want to be biblical, you have to say the church is the people, not a building. And going to church in the first century meant going to someone's house and having church in a home. And the people of the city, it's interesting when you read the epistles to the church of God at Corinth. Well, it's talking about all the Christians in Corinth, or the church of God at Rome, all the Christians in Rome. But when you broke it down, they met in different house churches. They couldn't all meet in one house. Now, they could have a special venue, probably outdoors, where they could all meet for special occasions. But what we think of as the church of God at Corinth would have been multiple churches. Or, for example, when Paul wrote the letter to the Romans in Romans 16, he identifies and gives greetings to 5 different house groups, 5 different house churches. But they are all considered part of the same church, which does indicate there should be a unity, even if we do have what we consider different churches or congregations with different pastors in the same area. There should still be an overarching unity where we work together. We consider ourselves the same body, and we work toward unity and ministerial ethics and what we call in the UPC a section. And then we have different sections in a district. So there should be probably a stronger feeling we're all part of the same church. But going back then, the Church of God at Rome or the Church of God at Corinth, they consisted of many small house churches, which, again, a large church today might have small groups. And to give you scriptural justification, if you go back to Acts 2:46, it says they continued the temple, which would be the large venue outdoors where everybody could come together, at least as long as the Jewish religious authorities didn't block them. But then it says specifically, and from house to house. If you read Acts 5:42, which I think might be worth just taking a look at. So let me go back in Acts 2:46, New King James. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. They ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. So obviously they had a house ministry or small group ministry. And then if you go forward to Acts chapter 5 and verse 42, and daily in the temple and in every house, they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. It says in every house, maybe that goes beyond the idea of churches meeting in a house, but even people that were able to meet together, they would have some activities, a Bible study or a prayer meeting. They looked like they brought it to every house of every Christian. And then The Apostle Paul says something to the Ephesian elders when he's summarizing his ministry among them shortly before his departure. He says, how I kept, Acts 20:20, how I kept back nothing that was helpful, but proclaimed it to you and taught you publicly and from house to house. So it seems that he would have a meeting where everybody could meet together. He would preach to them, but then he, as the founding pastor, would go from house to house. Now, so I think the concept is biblical. I think the application is left up to us. The Bible doesn't go into detail. And by not going in detail, I think it gives flexibility, because different cultures, different times, different situations, we can have the flexibility to adjust our methods. But the principle of meeting in small groups is biblical. So some churches will actually have a weekly small group meeting, either in addition to their traditional midweek Bible study or as a replacement. If you do it as a replacement, then you have to find other ways to make sure the teaching of the ministry of the church goes forward, which could be Sunday school hour. It could be special series of meetings. But then other small groups. So when I was a pastor, we had a very strong midweek Bible study, which seemed to be very effective in discipleship and fellowship and the various ministries of the church. And but sometimes we would break them into different groups. And then we developed our Sunday morning. We would have morning worship, but an hour before that, we would have Sunday school for all ages, including adults. And once we had the facilities, we broke those down into probably 7 or 8 adult groups. The college and career, what we call hyphen, singles 1, the young singles, but then you have older singles. So we actually had a singles 2. We had a young families, which would be for young marrieds and families or even single adults with children. We had deaf ministry, Filipino ministry. We would have the discipleship class. At different times, we'd have different classes, Korean class. So in effect, our Sunday school hour became like small groups. And then as we grew, we had various specialized ministries, grief recovery class, financial training class. I've already mentioned discipleship class, abuse recovery class. So the alcohol chemical treatment series, so alcohol and drug recovery class. So in essence, we broke down. So we did not have a weekly traditional cell meeting in addition to midweek service, but we used the midweek slot, we used the Sunday school slot, and we used other slots to have a variety of small groups. And of course, think about it, Sunday school for children and youth effectively becomes small group for all those different age groups. So there are many ways to do small groups, and the books I reference give you several ways to do that. I actually think not only is it biblical, but for a church to grow beyond a small cell that one pastor can fully administrate, which means if you're going to grow beyond like maybe 75, you really need to have some form of small group ministry. Another thing we did when I was a pastor, it wasn't the weekly cell, but what we call care groups, where the whole church was divided geographically with leaders, could be a lay leader or a minister or minister in training, and they were responsible to provide first level care, communication, prayer, follow-up, meetings, specific needs, referring to the pastor as needed, maybe organizing things like baby showers, housewarmings, food for people when they're sick, transportation, just a variety of practical, ministerial, or pastoral type services, but broken down into small groups so that every person in the church was part of a small network of people who live close by, and they could interact and minister with one another. So it's the body ministering to the body. And that's one of the advantages of small groups. There's several advantages. One is you're getting everybody involved on a personal way. You're getting everybody connected to people in a more personal way, at least with a small group within the large group. You're providing many more opportunities for ministry, for leadership, and for ministry of the body. People who are not leaders, but yet they contribute, help, communicate, and minister to one another. And then the basic fellowship and prayer. So I think there are many advantages. I don't think there's one right way. I don't think there's one model. A small church may, in essence, be its own small group. And that's not bad. A church of 20, 30, 40, it may effectively be a small group. But if the church is going to grow, in some way you have to think about how to have some type of small group connection. Because even a church of 100, it's surprising. The pastor knows everybody, but many people in the church don't really know each other or don't know each other well. And so if you're going to keep growing, you have to somehow duplicate the feeling of a small church as you continue to grow into a big church. And that's what we did in Austin. My motto was that we grew to right about 1,000 on our attendance roll, right under that, plus the 16 daughter works that we started during my time as pastor. But I always stated, I want us, as we grow into a larger church, I don't want to artificially cap the growth. If people are coming, they're receiving the Holy Ghost, they're being discipled, they're being ministered to, and they want to be here, I don't want to limit them and say, we don't want you anymore, go somewhere else. But on the other hand, I want to maintain a small group feeling, a small church feeling where they still feel connected, accountable, involved, not lost in the crowd, but have opportunities for ministry, service, and relationships. So as we grow into a big church, we've got to maintain the connections of a small church.
You mentioned some great resources at the beginning of this episode, but people can also find small group materials, the actual teaching materials, at PentecostalPublishing.com. And they're continuing. I know they're really making an effort to produce more of those.
Yes.
So people can go there, check that out. It's PentecostalPublishing.com. A lot of great resources. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Apostolic Life in the 21st Century. If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to Dr. Bernard's channel, like this video, and leave a comment. We also encourage you to check out Dr. Bernard's books. Visit PentecostalPublishing.com and search for David Bernard to access a full list of titles. Don't forget to enter DKB10 at checkout to save 10% on your order. We look forward to seeing you again next week as we explore how modern-day believers can live out the teachings of the first century church.